So Erich, we've come here today, and I want to do like a proper opening for our meeting here today. It's in the Tango sa Nith the Sneset Humayathin. Hungsui Elenoch Mayath Huning Smayeth. And so Nith the 8 lungs at the Smayeth. It's in the Tangoch Latla Lakusaa Nith the Sneset Spath. Nanu Saisi Awa Nanu Nakwasiwawa Nanu Eatet Nanu Eatatang the Spath I Awis Yet Latla and so Atmetal I Nacht the Siltangoch wat Gels yet Gels Quanochet Spath I Nacht the Siltangoch at the Snenet and so ngant Squam Esa I ngant the Seathlands Esa it's in the Elch I the Bay I the say I the Tangoch the Sahwa the Salatsla Naquim I Kukomalis I Lulich the Salatsla Nage the Squachel Chun eats a songs at Atia Enok It's in Mok the Stu songs I Stang Yucht Sta Athea. Good day everyone. My name's Tiffany Joseph. I'm acknowledging this land that we are on today. The name of this place is Humayathin. You can hear the sound Mayeth in that word, and that is related to Smayeth. So this place is a place where it would have been basically like the home of deer, and therefore it would have been a place that we hunted a lot. The Saanich people would have hunted in these areas a lot. And anyone who lives in the highlands knows that there's a lot of deer in this area. So that name remains to be true in this modern context that we live in now. There's also another place close by called Spath, and Spath is a place where a bear was turned to stone because have you ever been down to Mackenzie Bight? Yeah. So I consider that one of my most favorite places to walk because it's a nice leisurely downhill stroll, and it's just like, oh my god, look at the beauty, look at these amazingly tall trees, and this is just like the perfect slope to walk down. And then you get down to Mackenzie Bight and it's just this beautiful sight of like the sea and little islands and stuff like that, and it's like, wow, this is just beautiful. I don't even want to leave here. Like I could just sit on this nice big giant rock and just sit here all day. That's how I feel. And coincidentally, that bear was turned into stone, and that big giant rock that I think looks so comfy is the very bear that was changed for basically being too lazy to swim across the water. And I'm like, I very much relate to this bear. I don't want to leave. I don't want to swim across this water either. So again, that energy still exists there, where it's like, how about I just take it easy here? This is where I just want to relax here, have no cares in the world right now. And Kelch, the creator, I guess he frowned upon that. But we're in a much faster paced lifetime, I think, than at the beginning. So I think we need to take those opportunities to relax a bit more. I'm here today to talk to CRD about Indigenous peoples and Saanich peoples' connections to the parks within our territories and within what is known as the CRD's territory. And I'm here with Erich. Erich, would you be willing to explain how this all came together here today?
Yeah, so there's actually two conversations that happened that brought us here today. One that I had talked to Parks staff about some of the history that I've heard and understand from a Saanich perspective about this area, and they asked some questions around what are some things that we can be thinking about when we see people harvesting in parks. What can we do when we want to share stories or share things that we've heard with the public, like how do we do that? And I said, well, that's not really for me to say, but it would be great to connect with someone in the community about that. So that was one piece. And then I also once sent you sort of a long-winded email about saying we can go out and do this and get youth together and go harvest in parks, and you were very patient with me, and you kind of said, well, we need to slow down a bit and think about what we're doing and what this is about to kind of create more of that understanding. So that's led us to here today.
Thanks, Erich. So one thing that I'm very concerned about is I do a lot of land restoration work. I remove invasive plants and I plant indigenous plants because I'm aware that I have a responsibility for the next 7 generations. I also have a responsibility to the animals that make these, what we call parks now, their home. And I'm aware that people developing land have not considered the well-being of all the life that is on the land. So that is something that I hold at the forefront personally. And I feel also it's important to say we're in a park known as Mount Work. This is also known as the Highlands area. And this is a place where ancestrally and into present day Saanich people have considered these places good hunting areas. At this point in time, there's a lot of houses within this area, so it's an infringement upon our traditional hunting territories, and it's been detrimental. There's a lot of talk lately about food systems. And for us, food systems are not farms. They are hunting places. They are fishing places. The most popular fishing place is Goldstream Park. And now a lot of people's homes are in those places. So when we're talking about food systems, to be able to restore food systems, the clear-cut answer of that would be like removing houses, but that's a lot easier said than done. So really, what people who live in Saanich and Lekwungen territories, I acknowledge the Lekwungen people because though CRD is in Saanich territory, it's also in Lekwungen territory. So both of our nations are impacted by these borders created and the laws created, and the development that's happened over time. And basically something that needs to start emerging is that people within our territories have to understand that they are in a food system, they are in a hunting grounds, and there was never any negotiation about people starting to build homes in those places. There was never any agreements made between our people and people settling or building in those places to build there and also understand what the history of that land is. the reason why I mention that also is that my husband is a hunter, and he's gone to places where we have the rights to hunt in those places. It has been outside of our territory, technically, but he's had charges laid against him, and those charges are basically bogus. Decades ago, somebody was hunting in the same area, literally on the same road that they lived on the same road that we live on now. So they're from our nation, and they won a court case that they have the right to hunt there. And yet it's about 50 years later, and he's facing the same charges. So the reason he had to go up there is because, there's so many houses within our current hunting territory. So that's something that we can help develop, get some help, but support, I guess is a good word, in supporting us practicing our rights. When I say rights, I don't mean like treaty rights, which we do have those treaty rights. I mean our birthrights as CRD people, as saltwater people. Do you have any questions or thoughts?
Yeah, maybe what would be helpful, I've heard you speak about this before, is I think that sometimes is a Western view that we have that people go into parks and they harvest, and that damages the plant, and there are concerns around that. And I think what I've heard you say, and some West Saanich worldview, is more about the relationship aspect with the plant, and that it's very important to be aware, or things that I guess that West Saanich people do when they harvest, about sometimes things about the direction they face, or the things that they say, or just that more relational aspect about that. Maybe that would be something that could be good for us to understand a bit more.
So when I started learning about Indigenous plants, I was learning from a man named Ken Elliott, who learned from many elders in Cowichan and Saanich, and probably other Coast Salish nations. And traditionally, when it comes to plant knowledge and understanding, that's something that's passed down in families between generation to generation. So a lot of times people will come to someone like myself or other people in my nation and say, oh, we'd love to learn about Indigenous plants. And there's hesitations. And the reason why there's hesitations is because that knowledge has always been something that's belonged to families. So, for example, I might have a relationship with ocean spray, and another family might have a relationship to June plum. My family doesn't. We don't interact with that plant because we know it's not ours. It's not a plant we belong to. We belong to the ocean spray. That kind of knowledge hasn't been handed down to me through my family. There are people who still embody those teachings and that passing down of intergenerational knowledge. So they're protective. And also, even though I wasn't raised that way, I'm protective of their rights, of their birthrights. So it's really complex. I think a lot of times people think, oh, why don't you want people to learn about the Indigenous plants? It's not that. It's how do we move forward? How do we do this respectfully? How do we respect these families? And it has to be understood that we're not just a nation, we're families. That's how we understand land as well. There's, for example, there's ancient reef net sites along the coast. Those were not seen as like Saanich territory. Those were seen as, first and foremost, this family had a reef net site at this island, and this one had one at that island, and this one had one at that island but in the middle, and this family was at the southern tip of the island. So we're families first before we're a nation. And to be able to navigate that is to understand that, and understand that every family is going to be following different teachings. Even how you use the plants. Maybe one family might be more inclined to use roots, and another one more inclined to use leaves. And it's the breakdown of that intergenerational, I should say interruption. It's the interruption of that intergenerational knowledge sharing that has really impacted the knowledge and ways of being able to harvest ethically and responsibly. So I know that I've heard in Stout, we have a lot of khmin. Khmin is known as bare stem desert parsley in English, also known as like a wild celery. There's also non-politically correct names for that plant as well, if you look it up in the Pojar McKinnon book, or any other plant ID book. And that is a medicine that I've known like almost all Satanish people to use. And sometimes people would go to a patch where they would normally find khmin, and they only harvest the seeds. But then they come and see that somebody's ripped it out of the ground, or they've cut it, and they feel upset because that's not the way that they were taught. And there are nations of people across all of Turtle Island who have those kinds of teachings, like you never take this plant when it's going to seed. We see it as like that's a mother with her children, and you don't harvest at that time. Same goes for hunting deer or elk. We don't traditionally tend not to hunt when the females are carrying babies. And the thing is, not everyone respects those teachings. So it's a really complex thing to navigate. I'm not even going to pretend that there's an answer right now. It really is something that is, I would say, having the seeds would have to be planted now. The understanding that even though the way I was raised, the way I was taught was to be protective of land and a steward of land, it doesn't mean that everyone in my community, was also raised that way, but also even given those teachings of how to do that. And there's still a lot that I need to learn. Even though I'm coming here sharing some things, I want to be clear that like I'm still a young person. I am still reclaiming a lot of knowledge that wasn't given to me while I was a child. But the most important thing that I was ever taught, and I've always been taught, is to have good thoughts and good feelings. When it comes to anything we do, all our work. In Sinchothan, if you're going to ask somebody, oh, what are you doing? We say, Steng Quins Che. Yeah, Steng Quins Che. And that means, what's your work? It's not like, what is the action that you're doing? What is your work? What are you committing to today? And so if I'm ever going to cook food or harvest medicines, it's going to be done if I have good thoughts and feelings inside. And for a long time, I haven't been able to harvest Indigenous plants because I am so concerned about their well-being. I don't have those good feelings. I have to be able to believe when I go and harvest plants that I know I'm taking the right amount. I have to know inside myself that if I'm harvesting something, that somebody's not going to come behind me and over harvest it just because they saw me. So that's why I feel I wanted to do this video too, is that there are people who learn about Indigenous plants and they start harvesting. And somebody might say, oh, I learned about harvesting khmin. It's such a powerful medicine to the Satanish people. My class went together and we harvested some. And they tell a friend, and then the friend goes behind them the next day and wipes out the whole patch, And the person shared those teachings that they got from a Satanish person with such excitement and glee, not realizing that they were passing this information off to somebody who didn't have that conservation, that protection, that ethical harvesting thing in mind, and then damage that patch. So I feel like that's the most important thing There was another thing that we had talked about as well, about like how can we approach people harvesting within the parks. And in terms of how that can be accomplished respectfully, there's actually no clear-cut answer again. It is the thing where this is a point of planting seeds, of building relationship and understanding of our community. And by our community, I mean a community of Indigenous and non-Indigenous, of settler and authoritative figures within these territories. And for us as Huilnguk, as Satanist people, as caretakers of these lands, it will always be paternalistic. It doesn't matter how you go about it, it'll always be a paternalistic act to approach an Indigenous person harvesting on their ancestral lands. That has to be said. We have to sit with that discomfort because it's just a fact, and it's the only way we can move forward. Having that understanding that if somebody has been given a position of authority within an Indigenous person's land, there's always going to be a paternalistic dynamic, and it can be frustrating for some, and it could also be you might come across somebody who's like, I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. I'm glad you're protecting this. And there's not going to be a clear-cut answer. Believe it or not, we're complex people with different points of view and beliefs.
So you don't have a script for us or nothing, no? Okay. All right.
And obviously for people within the parks that are working within the parks and caretaking for the parks, to come and see someone harvesting, don't always know if there's someone who this is their traditional territory and has Indigenous rights to be harvesting there. So that's the challenge sometimes of walking up and approaching someone engaged in harvesting.
And I don't think, again, you'll never really know if somebody is from this place until you start getting to know the community. And there's some friends of mine who basically would be what we would call white passing. And their family has taught them all the medicinal teachings and all the respectful ways of harvesting. And it will more than likely be upsetting to be approached and to not be known because it's something that they experience a lot in their life. And then there could be like somebody like me, I might go in Lekwungen territory. I mean, I won't unless I was invited by somebody who I have a relationship with. But I could be in Lekwungen territory harvesting and people are like, oh, she's clearly Indigenous. She knows what she's doing and I won't be bothered. And that might not necessarily be fair, you know. I might not actually have the protocols, or somebody else who looks like me who might not have the protocols. So it's never going to be an easy thing to do. But always, I think, building up that compassion and understanding of what people's lived experiences could be is those seeds that we can plant. So yeah, I'll kind of reiterate what those lived experiences could be, just to help people start building that idea of like, what does this trigger within people if I approach them and they get upset? So if you approach somebody who looks fair-skinned, but they're actually saying, this is my territory, this is a place I belong, you don't have a right to tell me I can't harvest here, I have a treaty right. What you might be triggering in them is that they don't belong to the place because of how they look, and because of colonial violence and environmental violence. For others, it might be they actually might just be an entitled person. That's a reality. There could be people who have entitlement and actually not be from here at all, and be demanding that their rights be respected when maybe they actually don't have those rights. I mean, technically they do under the way the Indian Act is written. Any Indigenous peoples would be technically having the right to harvest in parks. It doesn't mean that person has a good relationship with the stewards of the land. And the thing is that not everyone harvesting is a steward of the land, and not every steward of the land is harvesting. There's not always an overlap, but often there is. So what I personally do, I mentioned before that I'm hesitant to harvest indigenous plants until I've been invited enough, basically, to do so. But I'll harvest invasive plants because that's protecting the land. I'm also still getting the medicine of the land that I descend from. And that could be something that could potentially be developed of like, oh, how can we encourage people to go to these invasive plants instead of the indigenous plants? But yeah.
Like dandelion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I've harvested is English hawthorn.
Oh, I was just gonna say hawthorn.
Yeah.
Is a good one.
Yeah, it spreads really quickly, so any help slowing that down is really good. It's also a good heart medicine. So.
There you go. Another question that I was thinking about was, I think you mentioned the interruption of intergenerational knowledge transfer, and you mentioned a lot to do with private development that's encroached on spaces where Indigenous people would have harvested. Another one is parks. Has been traditionally a space that's kept people out of the landscape, and what we're doing right now is trying to broaden that understanding of how Indigenous people related with the land. And I guess the question here is that our park staff spend a lot of time speaking to the public. And I think they are often asked questions about that kind of history, or they're kind of prompted, or they may have heard a story somewhere that they may want to share, and maybe just I think you spoke to it a bit previously, but maybe just a bit of words to that about how park staff can be thinking about how they're referring to Indigenous peoples of the territory, and if they hear a story, the kind of maybe some protocol around sharing those kinds of stories, or is that?
Well, I feel like Dave Elliott Sr., he published a book called Saltwater People. There's also available online on the DFO website, Saanich Caretakers PDF. And in the Saanich Caretakers book, all the place names, and there's a map of our territory that's been made available. And that's a good resource. Also, Saanich Ethnobotany. There's stories in there. And really, I feel like just acknowledging where any information comes from. Acknowledging that there has been a great effort by many Saanich people, and they're not all published, for people to take care of the land and the ocean. Understand that all we've ever wanted to do was to be able to live life like we always have, and that there's a long history of law preventing us. Basically, one of the first laws that we had to, one of the first laws that interrupted our cultural practices was the banning of the reef net. So, as peoples who've been in these lands and water since time immemorial, we managed to fish with reef nets, gathering abundance of salmon without damaging the salmon stocks. 150 years of colonial rule of the land, and we don't really have that privilege anymore. No people on this planet have that privilege anymore. We all have to be careful, and we don't take too much. We've always had that teaching, don't take more than you need. And we did that successfully. And yet, when that right was taken away from us, that's when things went out of balance. So understand that we have extreme intelligence through our connection to the land. And it's been ignored, and deemed inferior. Basically, what colonization is an arrogance. So if you want to decolonize, let go of that sense of arrogance, if it's within you. I'm going to say you don't seem arrogant at all.
Sometimes we all have our moments. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I can definitely say I do. So I definitely don't want to come across that way. That's my own decolonial act as well. But also, this is the point where we start building the relationships that I think all of us who grew up and see colonization as extremely damaging, this is where we're like, okay, if this was 150 or 200 years ago, how would I have landed on this land, and how would I have been a good guest? How would I have respected the hosts who were making this place available to me, who are willing to work with me? How am I going to start building that relationship? It needs to also be understood that with our vast amount of knowledge, we were rather healthy people. Socially, physically, spiritually, we're rather strong people. And the first representatives of Europeans were all incredibly sick, incredibly malnourished, also incredibly violent, so emotionally and mentally unwell. And that is basically the formers and creators of Canada. And understanding that decolonizing doesn't mean you're losing anything except for a violent and arrogant bend, right? So also with that is a violence towards women, that the Saanich people, we did everything we could to build a society that respected the safety of women. And that includes our ability to harvest from the land without meeting violence, to be in relationship and without experiencing violence. I think a better way to word it is seeing women as sacred, because we see land and life as sacred, and women give life. And I mentioned that even though it might seem unrelated, it's not, because violence on the land equals violence on Indigenous bodies. And one of the ways that we practice that teaching is through our respect of life givers. And that is human women, human life givers, but also in the form of the plants themselves and the animals themselves. Like I mentioned before, we don't hunt deer in the time that they're mating, so that they can continue on. Their generations can get passed on, again, for sustainability. And a lot of those teachings, a lot of times when Indigenous people were opposing development in many places in Turtle Island, or even telling people like, oh, you shouldn't be here in this place, and they'd ask why, we'd say it's sacred. And a lot of times the reply to that, I was like, oh, everything's sacred to you people. But if you look at, again, the imbalance, the place that we're at in terms of climate change, this concept of like something being sacred was not just, it's taboo if you destroy this land. It's that you're putting things out of balance. You're putting not just this piece of land at risk, but everything that's connected to it. And as human beings, we might actually never really understand how connected every place on this planet is, and how everything on this planet needs to be in harmony and balance. Like, we'll never mentally be able to conceptualize of that. But by having that mindfulness of the importance of place. If sacred is too jarring of a word for some people, just important. This place is important. And it's my duty as a land steward to understand how everything is important to one another. How's the soil important to the tree? How's the leaf important to the tree? How does taking of these leaves benefit this tree? How does not taking certain leaves benefit this tree? So an example of that is butterflies. How butterflies will make nests in leaves to nest in and grow in over the winter. If we don't take that leaf, then we're ensuring that butterflies will continue be born in the springtime. If somebody who's non-Indigenous or even Indigenous and doesn't know that that plant is a host plant to butterflies, they might just cut down a whole stalk of that plant. They might take leaves but accidentally be taking a butterfly nest. And that's something that all human beings in these lands can understand, no matter their ancestry. That's important for us all to know. And also the well-being of soil and how we are a part of the ecosystem. Human beings are a part of the ecosystem. Coast Salish culture can provide a really obvious representation of how human beings being a part of an ecosystem is not only beneficial but essential in the form of the Garry Oak ecosystem, which I will encourage people to start calling the Camas ecosystem, because the Camas ecosystem would not exist without us. It is our controlled burns that make that ecosystem exist. And it's been, again, the interruption of our controlled burns over our whole territory that has been a part of its decline. Since the early 2000s, I've heard that the Garry Oak ecosystem is only about 5% of what it used to be. A lot of it is, again, because people put their houses within these ecosystems, and also because that controlled burning cannot happen at the scale it used to. So what can we as people in, not just in parks, but in our residential areas, like how can we be part of the ecosystem again? If we're in parks, like respecting that Indigenous people do need to harvest camas. It's incredibly important for our health, and the people who harvest camas know how to harvest camas because they haven't lost that family connection to that, and that's incredibly true. And camas is an extremely resilient plant. It takes 7 years to grow from seed to flower, but in that process it produces a bulb. And that bulb becomes a mother bulb who creates more bulbs. And in working with camas, I've potted camas, I've pulled apart those bulbs and replanted them into new pots. And that's something that we can also do on the land. So it is actually our relationship to camas that helps camas flourish. And not just in the harvest, but also the burns that we need to do and we need to bring back. There are people who still manage to do those controlled burns, but they've had to fight for that. They've also had to try and maybe do it as privately as possible, just to make sure that they are doing that work that they've known that was important their entire lives, but also have had people resisting their stewardship of the land. But it's, again, just a really great example because if we weren't doing those controlled burns, then the ecosystem wouldn't be anything near what it is and was. Producing so many flowers that provided so much homes to so many butterflies in terms of numbers, but also diversity of species, that when there was times that butterflies would die, there was a settler who reported that there was about 5 inches worth of butterflies just floating on the sea. Now I feel like maybe I see a few butterflies here and there. So we're definitely nowhere near what the land was like when Saanich and Lekwungen people were stewarding the lands. And it's just important to acknowledge that it's not an accident. A lot of people think, oh, of course it was fine. Nature was doing its thing. No, we were participating with nature to, again, be in harmony, be in good relationship with those ecosystems, marine ecosystems, meadow ecosystems, and the forest ecosystems, so that all life, including ourselves, could know and experience abundance. Butterflies had abundant homes, bats had abundant homes, and they had abundant food to eat and gather, and all other species. It was all about keeping that balance, and so that humans could experience abundance as well.
Cool. Did you have anything that you would like to?
I was just thinking a little bit about the opportunity I think that exists when you have people who work in regional parks who often are very passionate about, caretaking and making sure that the plants and animals are cared for and that the parks are safe for everybody. And then, you have communities where that has been the goal for a very long time, is to really, steward and care for the land. And so I think there's a neat intersect there, where there's an opportunity for some reconciliation through that shared, interest and passion. And I'd love to hear if you had some thoughts on that.
I think for folks who get into working with the parks, again, accessing those resources that have been published by, for example, Dave Elliott Sr. And the Saanich Ethnobotany that was published by Nancy Turner, who interviewed Elsie Claxton and Violet Williams, and a few other elders as well. Connecting with the different organizations and volunteering. Eric, are there some places that you've volunteered with in Saanich territory?
Yeah, I've done some volunteer work with Project Reclaim, of course, helping out pull invasives at a site at Sartlip, Hellemite Playground, where they're pulling invasive plants and then planting native plants again to kind of restore that space. Also, there's opportunities at CRD Parks to volunteer with some of their things. I know HAT, Habitat Acquisitions Trust, does volunteer days like that to kind of work with the land and restore the land. And yeah, I'm sure there's other groups that I'm not even thinking of, but yeah.
Have you been to Papakanhout?
Oh yes, Papakanhout. Yes, yeah, I've been there a few times. I like to just pop in and say hi to Earl and share lunch with him. Papakanhout is a garden connected to the tribal school, where they are planting and propagating native plants that I think some they gather from out in the wilderness, and then some they grow there, and then they're kind of using those to restore sites, and a lot of it's being used at Sneakwith, right, at Todd Inlet, and that's a great place to help and to learn and offer support, I think, when the time's appropriate, but we can connect about that on the time. Wanted to do that.
And I wanted to share also that the reason why we're doing this in a video format is, Eric invited me to speak to CRD staff, and I'm happy to. I'm happy to do that work again because I'm a land steward. I care about the land, but I'm also a steward of my people and our well-being, because those are not disconnected. The reason why I did this in video format is okay, we need a refresher. Let's watch this video that Eric and Tiffany and Tracy did, and see what we learned. Maybe what did we forget? because, you know, in 5 years you might have completely new staff and they might have to watch us again. And me coming in every single time, you know, I'm going to be 38 in 5 years. So it's like, am I going to be living the same life, doing the same things? Likely not. I'm hoping I'm growing and expanding. But I hope where I'm at right now, where I have this resource of a video camera, I can share this so that it can continue to move forward. And then it's also an opportunity to see, like, okay, where was CRD 5 years ago? How much have we improved since then? Where have we dropped the ball? And how much of our staff are reading Saanich Ethnobotany? How much of them are reading the Saltwater People book? Do we need to have some prerequisites now of like, okay, you need to read these resources that the Saanich people have been creating for us since, I believe, like at least the 70s or something, right? Because that willingness to educate has been presented. It's just hasn't been accessed enough. And that's just something that has to happen. And again, just recognizing that colonialism and the theft of our lands has always been a trauma. And if you are engaging with our community, that could be something that you encounter. And to be respectful of, you know, these, if you have resistance from somebody, it's because there is a harm, that I'm just trying to live my life in a good way and harvest these plants, and I'm getting harassed because that's what's happened for hundreds of years. I should say 150 years to be specific. I'm saying 151 years specifically because that is, it marks that on paper that violence has been 150 years. That's not very long. There's somebody you know who was alive at the beginning. Maybe when you were younger, somebody could have been alive at the very beginning of Canada. And, you know, my great-grandfather was born in like 1892. So that's about 4 generations, I guess, back that Canada would have became an official country. One way I also like to put it is that a lot of times when people calculate generations, it's 25 years. So Canada is technically just entering its 7th generation. It's the first year of the 7th generation. So how things were in the beginning and where we are now entering the 7th generation, how are we going to right all the wrongs that were committed for the past 7 generations so that we can give the next 7 generations a much more hopeful future where people respect one another, where they respect land, where they respect water, and respect families. It's very interesting that one of the tools of colonization is Christianity, and that it's that the message that often comes from Christianity is that a lot of things that they deem sinful destroys families. Yet, in my experience, in my point of view, the violence committed, especially through residential schools, is actually been the destruction of family. It planted the seed of violence within families. So again, to decolonize is to have safety for families. And I think that's a future we all want. And understanding that to be a part of a family is also to be a part of a family of an ecosystem as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Just want to really acknowledge spending your time with us to talk about this, and acknowledge that you said that you feel like you have a responsibility to be a steward of your culture. And so, I appreciate you being very generous with us today to spend some time learning and helping us understand as well. Just for staff who may be watching, we do have access to those books that were mentioned, and we will, make sure to make them available and circulate them through staff for people to read. And also, we take what we're doing at CRD very seriously as our role as a government body on this territory. It's really important for us to understand that we are on another people's territory, and what is our role around that, what is our responsibility around that, how do we form respectful relationships that help us understand that better, and like you said, there's been a lot that's been done that's been not okay, and how do we move forward to set people up better for the future. And it's people like you that are going to help us understand that, and all of us really, but help with that guidance. So I appreciate the time spending with us today.
And I wanted to talk to you all about Erich Kelch. So talking about the land and remembering how it was taught, the history that's been taught to me, gives me good feelings, but also talking about my own experience gives me good feelings. I get to tell my story of this land in a way that makes me feel joyful. And, maybe I'm defying some of those teachings a little bit with my quote unquote laziness. But we come from a people who are very hardworking people, and that's a value that's been promoted a lot. But again, I think we live in a much different time where everything is so fast-paced that we actually really need to understand how to slow down and use our time wisely, because we're in an informational age. So that's why I wanted to create this video too, is like, this is an information age. How about we use all of our energy as best as we can and use this video resource that can share all of our voices over and over and over again, where we get to enjoy our life, maybe actually being in these parks or being with our family. I think that's something that we all want to experience. And that's what Erich Kelch is about. How can you be in relationship to other people, to other beings, and have those good thoughts and feelings inside? So I think, again, I mentioned before, in 5 years, we're all going to be doing something different. Maybe you'll both still be at CRD. Maybe you'll be higher up in your position at CRD. Maybe you're going to move completely out of this field, or maybe you're going to even leave this whole island. Who knows where each of us are going to be. So at this moment in time, we care a lot about the relationship of all people in these lands to the territory, but also the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and specifically in this context right now, SÁNEĆ people and CRD and the parks themselves. And right now we have good thoughts and feelings, but if your bosses said, we need to have this conversation again, you both, and myself included, might be like, really? Do we have to have this conversation again? I feel like we've done this work. So this is giving us the opportunity to do this work at one time, and if it needs to be repeated again, it's not going to be our physical bodies that has to be there. And I think there's value to that. That's why I got into videography in the first place. But also, Erich Kelch is being able to do work with good heart and good mind. That's what Kelch means. It means heart and mind. So the concept of like how I feel and what I think, they're not separate concepts in our language and in our worldview. So if you're thinking a negative thought, you're feeling a negative thought. It's something that happens at the same time. A lot of times in this day and age for like self-help stuff, there might be an emphasis of like, think good things, and not allowing you to go into your heart and it's like, what's really happening inside my heart. Ways that we can look at that practically speaking is, this is my job today. This is the work that I'm going to do today. How can do I have good feelings about this, and why? Is it the work itself, or is there something that happened before work that made me feel not so good inside? A cultural way that's explored is like, for example, say I had a loss in my family, and Erich, being a friend of mine, might understand, oh wow, Tiffany's experienced a loss. She really needs to take care of herself and be mindful of herself. She can't be cooking, so I'm going to bring over a pot of soup to her, because her family still needs to eat, but they also need to have those good feelings in that food. If Tiffany cooks, she's going to have grief, and she's going to be putting grief into her cooking. So if she does that, if Tiffany cooks food with grief, she's feeding grief to her family, and the grief grows. So by taking care of each other, when we have good feelings, making sure those who aren't in a good place for any kind of reason, we help lift them up and feed them that love, that care, that strength. Because when I'm in grief, I'm not feeling strong, but that's okay. We come from a people where it's like, if you have grief, that's okay. We'll take care of you, because when I'm in my grief, you're going to come around and you're going to take care of me. It's not conditional that way, but it's hopeful. It's having faith. Again, the way you get to that place is relationship. I believe that Saanich and many Coast Salish peoples and many other Indigenous nations had that for so long, like generations of this culture and nature of caring, that it was really easy to trust one another, because we had like a soul memory, you could say, of that we always take care of each other. That's what we do here in this land, and we're always going to continue to do that. Now, some of those things have been broken, and also the concept of what community looks like has expanded. So we're all creating these new relationships. Another way you can think about Aitchquelequins is like, when you are at work, when you're in your park, you're in the park that you work in, ways that you can have good feelings that I feel can be shared from our culture is just to do what I did just a moment ago. I acknowledged the place. This place is Humayathan, but I also acknowledged the tree, its name, in its Enchanthan name, right above you. Yeah. Stitch. And Tracy, you had like a good thing that you did where you invite people to give it its own name from your experience with it. Like, maybe I want to call this lots of helicopter seeds. Maybe I'm going to call this helicopter seeds, because I love these helicopter seeds. And this is going to be the helicopter seed tree. Like, hi, helicopter seed tree. Like, it's good to see you. I'm so grateful that you're here. I really appreciate the beauty that you have and how much you change. That's for some people, it might just be gratitude. To me, that's a prayer. So I'm going to use the word prayer, but use whatever word works for you in your mind. Just acknowledging, and if that's a better word for you, just acknowledging the life that's around you and your relationship to that plant and how it gives you good feelings, but also how you give back. That's so important when it comes to relationship is reciprocity. So the way I practice that personally, like, I don't take a lot from the land except for this oxygen that it gives so freely without any expectation. But also, I restore the land. I remove invasive plants because I want to feel like if I start taking from the land, then I know I have that relationship of reciprocity, that I'm taking these berries or this medicine, and I know that I've done so much work to make sure that there's enough for this plant to survive, and also anyone else who's coming along. they won't decimate this whole plant. And that's Aitch Grelequins too. Another way you can find Aitch Grelequins is maybe you do need to learn about the medicinal uses of it, but having some time to get to know the plant a little bit more before you take time to observe it and say, okay, this is how much flowers it's producing right now. And maybe you really are logical and scientifically minded, like, I'm gonna jot that down. I'm gonna write it down so that I know for sure that next year I'm gonna harvest from this, and next year I'm gonna know if it produced the same amount of flowers, and also what's the exact 20%. Some people like to shame that kind of thinking, but I'm like, I kind of work well with numbers personally, so numbers could be a really great way to relate to a plant. Just understanding that everyone's going to have a different way of relating and understanding a plant, and that all of those perspectives are valuable. And peeling back the layers of what makes a person's relationship so unique can also be a fun thing to do. So acknowledging as many plants as you can in a day before you even start working might be a good plan. Acknowledging any birds or other animal species that you might see. Maybe even looking for their presence even though you can't see it. Like, oh look, there's some deer droppings, or there's some deer hoof prints, and like, okay, wow, like, to me, that in that day it might be a sign like we're doing a good job taking care of this land because the deer are coming back, or we're doing a good job taking care of this land because there's food that this deer is like clearly drawn to. I wonder what it is. Maybe I can find that out today. And maybe I can also figure out how to share that with the community soon. Or maybe I can also do that, figure out a way to share that with the SÁNEĆ people. Like, I know you haven't been to the park recently, but here's some information that I really want to share with your community right now. So I work at Todd Inlet, which is technically a BC park, but it's the first village of the SÁNEĆ people. Maybe you'll come and visit me there on a Thursday or Friday when I'm working and say, hey, I'm up at this park in CRD. This is what I saw in the park. Tiffany, I think you'd love to hear about that. And I'd be like, yeah, I am happy to hear about that. If any of the animals, the bees, the birds are doing well and the plants are doing well, people could come and visit me at Skenequith and talk about the well-being of plants and animals in the parks that they work in. It's also really useful for me because I'm the kind of person who learns like from face to face. It was emphasized so much to me to learn through oral traditions. So being able to be face to face with somebody who has that knowledge, I retain it a lot more than if I was ever going to read it in a book. I'd rather feel like I'm getting information from another person. There's also an emotional connection that happens because I could be like, oh yeah, I remember we hung out that day and you were talking about this that was going on, and then you told me about this plant, and I remember more about that plant now because we were face to face. That's my preferred way of learning.
Yeah, so for myself, when walking through parks, and something that has helped my understanding of this, mostly from learning from WSÁNEĆ people, is like you said, like taking the time to kind of notice your surroundings. I think very often we come to a park like this and we're like, oh, we just hike up to the top and then we just hike back down, and did we take a minute to notice or acknowledge the trees and plants that are around us, and notice how they change through the seasons? And I think it's good to interact with the plants a little bit. Feel them, maybe smell them, or don't taste them. Don't taste the plants, but to build a bit of that understanding, and then through the seasons recognize how that plant changes, or does its area change over time, or that kind of stuff. Just to build in that awareness. Is really been something for me, and for me too, as someone who has harvested plants in the past and trying to learn more about being like respectful to that plant community and not taking too much, and being very aware of like why I'm doing it, and like, is this appropriate given that there may not be a lot of this plant. Like, I want to be more mindful of those things than I think I have been in the past. So trying to shift that awareness that, you know, this place has been taken care of by the First Peoples for many thousands of years, and you know, if we want to continue that to the future, like, we all have a role to play in that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I come to the parks for work, you know, often we're coming because we're with my team, we're going to be doing some education. We have school groups coming. Often it's really hectic, so just stopping and just really being present in the place and observing what's happening, so that we can share that with the people that we're going to connect with. And so, do we see, what are the herons doing right now? Are they waiting and hunting? And you know, what's the tide doing? And so I'm just making those observations and just really being aware of where I am, and just leaving some of that hustle and bustle of, like, you know, racing to get there and meet the class and get ready to do things, and just being really aware of, you know, the place that I'm in, and being thankful for that place, and being ready to kind of share that with people and be thankful that that's the role that I get to do. And you know, we talk a lot about sense of place in the BC curriculum now, and so to be able to sit with the class and say, all right, you know, what do you see, and let them sort of guide their own experience there too. And I think in the past we tended to just kind of always share our own knowledge, but just helping people build their knowledge and connection to the place and their own observations, so that, you know, we haven't had the luxury of many generations as settler families. We don't have that luxury of those, you know, such a long time of observation of a place. So to start cultivating that observation of that place.
What I'm appreciating about this right now is like how foggy it is right now. I think fog is one of my favorite natural experiences of land. Like, and it's so unique to here, right? Like not just here, but like wet places. You're not gonna find fog like this in a desert, I don't think. So I really appreciate fog. One of my favorite places is Sneedquith. When I walk from the Wallace Gate down the trail all the way down to the Snoopy tree, which is a big maple tree, there's just an incredible grounding that seems to happen, and peace that just washes over me, where a lot of my worries about life are just, they kind of dissipate. And it often is kind of a little bit foggy and a little bit moist in there, even in the hottest times, so you can still feel a little bit of a coolness there, which is a major relief to me living in Brentwood Bay, where it's incredibly hot and dry there. It's got its own climate that's like completely different than even just a little bit farther down or up, I don't know what the word would be, but like Coles Bay. There's a difference between Coles Bay and Brentwood Bay, and definitely a difference between Brentwood Bay and Victoria. It's got its own ecosystem, it feels. And then Sneedquith, Todd Inlet, is like a relief from that in a lot of ways. And the air is different there. It just feels different. It feels really close to it here. It's colder here, though. I feel like even colder. But just any time of the year, Sneedquith is a really beautiful and wonderful place to be for me.
My favorite place, I live on Mount Ptolemy. I don't know the local name for it. I've heard it's called Pecals and Lekwungen, but I'm not sure the other name for it. So and I really love it there in the springtime because of the camas bloom. I just love like the colors that come up, and the other wildflowers there in the meadow. And there's been a team doing some good work there actually to pull the invasives and restore the camas ecosystem there.
have so many. It's very hard.
You're allowed one choice.
Yeah, one. For me, like I live in Souk in the South Territory, and to go to Souk potholes and just really connect with that river. I think my family and I, we go there in the summertime and swim, and we go in the fall and watch the salmon return, and we go in the spring and look for the salmon fry and the coho in the stream, and just really watching it through all the seasons. And for me, I have a little one, and to just see her build that connection with seeing it all times of the year, and her observations of it and questions, and it just has really sort of endeared me to that place.
There's one I do with kids that you can do at some point that helps me teach them is I ask them, like, when you're finished school, would you rather go to your room and have some alone time, or would you rather throw all your books in the house and go play with your friends? Because that has to do with Irish eloquence. You know, the kids who'd say, "Oh, I just need time to like relax on my own." I asked them, what would you do if instead of that your parents said, "You need to go play outside every single day for like a year"? How do you think you'd feel? And some of them say depressed or angry or frustrated, feeling like they have no choice over what they're doing. I think that's what understanding Irish eloquence means too, is like, what does my energy need to do today? Or the kids who really need to be around all their friends, like how do they feel when they're alone? They might feel isolated and lonely and sad. And there's some kids who really need a snack. And if they didn't eat, they might get grumpy. And talking about all those different emotions that they can experience, which a lot of times we understand as like introversion or versus extroversion. Really comes down to Irish eloquence, you know. If we, you know, how much time do we need inside versus outside? That's something I had to choose when making a career decision. You know, I was like, I need a job that gets me outside, because I am so prone to. It's so easy for me to be consumed with technology. Make videos and stuff, you know. Like making videos can't be my full-time job, because then I'll be inside all the time. I'll never get outside. So I really need work that gets me outside, so that at least while I'm at work I have that connection to land, and hopefully expand that that ability to connect with land even more, or just balance me out at the very least, right? Haishka na kwachacha itasiam mok kwanzche mok kwanzleitan. Haishka the slamuch squachel. Haishka the slamuch. Neath the qua at the stisongs. Neath the seedlings at the stisongs. Neath the stenguch at the stisongs. Either altstenguch. Leitsta the qua. Chisla at the squachel. Chisla slamuch. Chichisla the chungitza slongsit. Ananu ait. At the steinuch. Tiwilta. Anesa the steinuch. La the stalu. Statalu. At the tanguch. Esla. Stelnuchs. The tanguch. The qua. The shkwana. The stalu. Gisang sa the Eili Stelnuch. Haishka Chelsiam. So I just said a little prayer acknowledgement, grateful for the plants and the land that brought us here today, acknowledged the rain and the cold weather that though we have to bundle up, it's really great for the stenoch, the salmon, and grateful for the rain and hoping that the salmon will make a good strong run this season, and just ask for the Creator to give medicine to the soil and the plants and the waters in forms of the sea and the rivers.
Aishka.
Ashka Hela.